When you're born in poverty and your whole family has been poor for generations, it's hard to break the cycle. Alice and Finn were trying just that. Nothing seemed to work. They decided it was time they stopped trying to save money to renovate their house and just did it themselves. If they had known what they would find underneath their floorboards, they would have torn them out long ago. Alice and Finn couldn't believe the amount of cash they had found, but their joy was short-lived. Alice stood frozen in shock as Finn was hammering away at the floorboard. When Finn gave the final blow to the floorboard with his hammer, he saw the bills, and they were trying to understand what had just happened. Then the realization hit them. They were rich. However, this was the beginning of their misery. Alice and Finn danced around the room in disbelief. At night, they talked about all the things they would buy: food, furniture, and, of course, the renovation of their house. But when they went to the grocery store the next day, something happened that neither of them had seen coming. Once they arrived at the store, things started to go south, and soon the police even got involved. And what they had to say to them about the money shocked them. But what was that money doing under their floorboards? Why did the police get involved? And what did they have to say? But before we start our story, smash the like button, make sure to subscribe, and hit the notifications bell so you won't miss any new stories. Alice and Finn were fighting one of the world's most common battles: poverty. They both came from nothing and had always hoped to, one day, stop worrying about having enough money for dinner. But as the years passed, they realized it was a battle never fit to be won. Not for them, at least. So they gave up. They made the best of what they had and truly started to feel happier. They lived in a small, run-down house that had been in Alice's family for decades and came by with just enough money to feed themselves 2 meals a day, with Finn's salary as a garbage man. They were content with their lives, but the house they lived in started to decay over the years, with termites taking over the foundation. They knew they had to do something about it, and quick. Otherwise, there would be no more houses to live in. They only had one choice. They had to renovate the house themselves. So they spent the first month or so gathering materials. They had very little money for this project, so they had to scour the streets to look for things to use. It was just the two of them trying to survive. So they started by taking out the flooring, and they soon figured demolishing was way easier than constructing. They had taken out half of the flooring in their living room and filled the empty spaces underneath with isolation. Then they used the wooden boards they had found to close up the floor again. But after working on this all day, their hands were tired from hammering nails all day. They decided to take out a bit more of the flooring and close it up the next day. As Finn's hammer smashed into the ground, dollar bills came flying up from underneath. It was a sight neither of them had ever seen, and for a moment, they had no idea what it meant. But then realization hit them, and they both gasped in disbelief. They looked at each other, grabbed each other's hands, and danced around the living room. Alice eventually fell to her knees and grabbed all the money still hidden deep underneath their house. There were stacks after stacks of $50 and even $100 bills, all wrapped up in little packs. She had to admit it looked a little shady. But was she really going to look away from that amount of cash? The rest of their night was magical. They chatted about their dream life, what they wanted to do with the money, and never felt more connected. When they woke up the following morning, it all seemed like a dream. There could be no way this money was dirty. Alice knew for a fact that there were no criminals in her bloodline. So because of that, it couldn't be true. It was only right for them to go to the grocery store first. They didn't bring all the money, as they didn't want to flaunt their new wealth in everyone's faces. They only took about $500. That would be enough, they thought. But something happened that they should have seen coming. Once at the grocery store, they stocked up on all the necessary things. They didn't think through was that they went to their usual grocery store, where they knew how poor the couple was. So, even though they only took $500 with them into the store, which seemed like a small amount, holding it next to the other stacks of cash, it stood out. Where they normally only bought half a loaf of bread, They now bought 2, and the staff was catching on. Alice suddenly felt like the staff was keeping an eye on them. They did that the first time Alice and Finn walked in, probably because they were scared they would steal something, but she couldn't understand why they were doing it now. They had known the couple for a long time, and they had never even stolen a breadcrumb. The true fascination began when they pushed their cart to the checkout. Maybe they had envisioned them trying to run out the door with a cart full of food, but they never expected this. The cashier hesitantly scanned the numerous products while exchanging confused looks with her colleagues. Finn and Alice knew how strange it must have seemed. 2 dirty, broke individuals suddenly buying months' worth of food. Where had they gotten the money? The store manager shared their doubts. He approached the couple and asked them to step into the back room. They followed, uneasy, as he led them to a small, tense space. "What is going on?" Finn asked. "That's what I'd like to know," the manager responded. "I don't want to accuse you of anything, but how do you plan to pay for all this?" Alice placed $500 on the table. As the manager reached for it, she quickly snatched it back. "It's real," she said firmly, preparing to leave, but a security guard blocked the door. "I'm sorry, but I can't let you go." Finn and Alice exchanged nervous glances. "I've called the police," the manager said. "You need to wait here." Alice sank back into her seat, her hands tightening into fists. They had done nothing wrong, yet they were being treated like criminals. Finn, usually reserved, cleared his throat. "We haven't stolen anything," he said. "Not yet," the manager replied coldly. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Anxiety twisted in Alice's stomach as the manager stepped outside, returning with 2 officers. "I'm Officer Smith, and this is Officer Hendricks," one of them said. "You have 2 choices. Come quietly, or we use handcuffs." Finn met Alice's eyes, then slowly stood. She followed, heart pounding. As they walked past the cashiers, Alice saw guilt flash across the woman's face. The ride to the station was silent. Alice knew they had to be careful. Anything they said could be used against them. At the station, they were led into an interrogation room. As Finn followed Alice inside, an officer grabbed his arm. "You're going to a different room," he said. Alice's stomach dropped. Separated? She needed Finn to stay calm, to help her explain. Panic tightened in her chest. "Hand over the money," Officer Smith said, holding out his hand. Alice hesitated. "Will I get it back?" The officer chuckled. "We'll see about that." Knowing she had no choice, she handed over the bills. The officer left without another word. Alone, Alice tested the door, but 2 officers stood guard outside. Meanwhile, Finn wiped sweat from his brow as he repeated their story for the 3rd time. "We found the money inside our house." The officer folded his arms. "Generations of poor families lived in that house without discovering it. And you expect us to believe you did?" Finn exhaled sharply. This was beyond frustrating. Officer Hendricks finally told him to stop talking and left the room. Finn wasn't cuffed, so he cautiously stood and peeked through the small glass window. Outside, Hendricks spoke with 2 other officers. Finn slowly opened the door and peeked at the one next to him, Alice's room. No officer was guarding it anymore. Heart pounding, he slipped inside. Alice gasped, then hugged him tightly. She was relieved and proud of him for coming. They shared their experiences. Finn described Officer Hendricks's relentless questioning, while Alice explained how Officer Smith had taken the money for testing. Uncertain of their fate, they held hands and waited. It took a long time for the officers to return. They first heard Officer Hendricks entering the room next door, his confused voice calling for Officer Smith. Then, both stormed into Alice's room. "Get up," Hendricks ordered Finn. When Finn didn't move, Hendricks yanked him up, cuffed him, and escorted him away. Not back to the other room, as Alice assumed, but to a cell. He was done playing games. Finn, though terrified, remained composed. One wrong word could be used against him. Alone in the cold cell, his frustration surfaced, his heart pounding, his eyes burning. Meanwhile, Alice waited anxiously. The door swung open, and Hendricks entered, his gaze sharp. "All right," he said, leaning on the table. "Since your man won't talk, I'll get the truth from you." Alice swallowed hard. "We were renovating our home, and we found—" Hendricks scoffed. "Enough with the lies. Do you want to join Finn in the cell?" Alice's hands grew clammy. She was telling the truth, but he wouldn't believe her. Should she lie to make him stop? Before she could decide, Officer Smith entered. Alice exhaled in relief. He looked calmer. "Can I speak with you outside?" he asked Hendricks. The two stepped out, their conversation heated. Smith returned alone. "Would you like something to drink or eat?" Alice hesitated before asking for water. His demeanor was puzzling. Why was he so different from Hendricks? Soon after, Smith re-entered with 2 glasses of water. Alice's eyes widened when she saw Finn walking in behind him. She jumped up and hugged him. "I was so worried," she whispered. They sat together, holding hands. Smith got to the point. The test results came back. "Can you tell me again where you found the money?" Without Hendricks looming over her, Alice felt at ease. She carefully recounted everything as Smith took notes. Then, unexpectedly, he apologized. The money wasn't reported missing, the serial numbers weren't flagged, and it was old, likely hidden under their floorboards for decades. Alice and Finn stared at him in disbelief. The money was legally theirs. They laughed, hugging again. Smith apologized once more. They understood why the officers had been suspicious, but relief washed over them. Once released, they returned to the grocery store, eager to flaunt their victory. This time, they loaded their cart even more than before. At checkout, Alice handed over the exact amount, then flashed a triumphant wink at the store manager. With their newfound fortune, they completed their home renovations and secured their future. Alice enrolled in evening school and became a receptionist. Their dream of breaking the poverty cycle was finally within reach.